And a good Monday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, and X. Available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. Hopefully you had a great weekend, a busy news weekend across the United States. We'll dive right into it this morning with outrage. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, outrage from federal employees as Elon Musk over the weekend, who is a special advisor to President Trump, leads the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, you've heard and are familiar with that name. He warned federal workers on it with a post on Saturday of a new policy requiring them to detail their work efforts via email in order to keep their jobs. And this has been met with unbelievable amounts of outrage. This has been met with a complete and total fit from what we'll call the progressive left. Individuals that do not believe in accountability. Individuals that are okay with our government bureaucracy, which does not work for the American people. Does not work for the individuals that fund the government to exist in the way that it does. Musk put out a post on Twitter that said this, quote, "Consistent with President @real Donald Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation." Okay, so what are the details on that? Please reply to this email with approximately 5 bullet points of what you accomplished last week and CC your manager. Please do not send any classified information, links, or attachments. The deadline is 11:59 p.m. on Monday. So midnight tonight going into Tuesday morning if you're listening on a Monday. Is that an outlandish request from Elon Musk? And he says, consistent with the president's instructions. So let's, again, Democrats continue to make this claim that Elon Musk is this unelected individual that's running the government, consistent with President Donald Trump's instructions. So not Elon Musk ginning this up out of nowhere, but consistent with what the president of the United States asked, I am carrying this out. We have talked about it, and he has chosen me or recommended me to carry out this task. Send an email to all federal employees and ask them to bullet point 5 items of what they've accomplished in the last week. You've got until Monday night to do that, 11:59 p.m. So if I could see that some of the comments were, he sent this email on a Saturday. If people aren't checking their emails on a Saturday, that's fine. They've got the entire day today to get it done. 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, depending on what your hours are. You've got the entire business day today to put in 5 bullet points of what you accomplished last week. Now, of course, in response to this, several federal agencies have told their employees not to respond, completely spitting in the face of the President of the United States. This is what NOAA had to say. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, sent out this following email. It says, quote, "After the email went out, agencies across the government warned employees not to respond. At the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for example, leadership told employees in an email that it was, quote, possible that a new message sent outside normal business hours was sent in error or is a phishing attempt. Until such time that we can verify the message that was received at around 4:46 p.m. is authentic, please do not respond. Employees of the NSA were instructed not to respond until further notice, and FBI employees received a similar message. They were waiting for further guidance. We learned similar things at the State Department. Colleagues, you have received a message from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, requiring you submit 5 work-related accomplishments. The State Department will respond on behalf of the department. No employee is obligated to report their activities outside of their department chain of command. So complete and total insubordination of the administration. And I've made this point a couple of times over the last few weeks. If you are against what this administration is attempting to do, if you do not believe that what Trump, who is the duly elected president of the United States, wants to do, the chief executive of the federal government at the executive level, if you do not believe that what he wants you to do or the things that he's asking you to do are right, are moral, are just, whatever you'd like to come up with your excuse, your rationale for why you shouldn't follow and do those things. It doesn't matter what the reason or the excuse is. If you don't believe that those things are just or should be done, that's fine. You've got a very simple solution. Submit 2 weeks' notice and your resignation. I don't think that's overly complicated. If you don't want to do these things, if you don't want to partake in what's going on at the federal level right now, nobody's holding a gun to your head and saying you have to work here. Go find a job somewhere else. Go work in the private sector like the vast majority of the rest of the American public. Go find a job in state government. Find something else to do. It is not a God-given right that you're employed by the federal government. And I don't think this task requested by Elon Musk is so outrageous and so outlandish. Very simple. Send an email back with 5 bullet points as to what you accomplished over the last week. If you're working 40 hours a week for the federal government, you should definitely be able to come up with 5 things that you accomplished or 5 things that you're working towards. If you didn't accomplish 5 things last week, then you should no longer be working for the federal government. It's as simple as that. If you did not accomplish anything last week, if you can't bullet point 5 things that you did, then you probably shouldn't have a job. We are watching a generational change take place in the federal government right now. We are living in the middle of that change going on. Fraud, abuse, waste has been the cornerstone of the federal government for decades. And you now have laser-focused agendas from this administration to get that under control. Are all federal employees gaming or scamming the system? No. Are a vast majority of them? No, probably not. But you can guarantee that there is bloat, redundancies, and excessive costs that are not needed in regards to personnel within our government currently. And a simple request like, list me 5 things that you did last week is a good start to try and root some of that out. It's not a ridiculous request. It's not 5 things that you accomplish every single day. That would be a huge waste of time. It's just 5 things that you did last week. So I put this out on my X account and I said this. I hope Elon Musk publishes the responses. Let's see what our hard-earned money is going to. That was followed up by an individual by the name of Anthony Lamessa, who doesn't have any description on his X account. He does have he's got 18,000 followers, but there's no description as to who he is or what he does, and I didn't bother reading into him. And so his response back to me was this. Would you prefer federal workers actually complete tasks for the American people or do busy work for the narcissistic oligarch who thinks he's running the show? So obviously, I think it's safe to say that Anthony Lamessa is not a fan of Donald Trump or Elon Musk. And by the way, Trump is running the show. He's the president of the United States. This idea that he thinks he's running the show. No, he is running the show. Maybe you guys don't understand how this whole system and process works, but we have this thing called an election for the president. It takes place every 4 years. And the winning candidate in that election sets the agenda for the federal government, sets the agenda for our country. It's really not a complicated task. He is, in fact, running the show. Your guys lost. We won. Our people won. You lost. We set the agenda now. So I responded back to that and said, what a ridiculous response. Federal workers have been gaming the system for decades. Let's see what they're doing in a 40-hour week. Again, 40 hours. Did you accomplish 5 things when you were making, or while you were working 40 hours for the federal government? His response back: do you seriously think Elon Musk sending a tweet on a Saturday afternoon demanding an email or resignation is the best way for citizens to understand what federal workers are doing? If this actually happens, do you know how many lawsuits will result? Please try and be serious. So there's the Saturday afternoon excuse. You think this is the best way? This goes back to one of the show titles earlier or middle part of last week. One of the titles of the show was the way that we do things, because that's become the blanket term for government when there's any pushback. Anytime there's any idea or any plan to shake things up at the federal level or the state level, the immediate response is, well, we've just always done things like that. It's this blanket excuse to cover waste and inefficiency. Well, we've just always done it like that. So that's just how we do it. It's a bad excuse. It's an excuse that private business and private enterprise doesn't operate. But the federal government and state governments can, because there's no accountability. There's never been anybody that has been as serious about this like you're seeing right now with the Trump administration. It's just never happened before. And I said this in response: Anthony, why do you believe it is so complicated for people working hard to explain what they're doing every week? I guess you don't support accountability. I don't think this is overly burdensome or overly complicated. You're grinding away at the stone for 40 hours a week, collecting your government paycheck, collecting your government benefits. What the hell are you doing? The response back: please think through what Elon is saying and apply the task to millions of people, some of which are even in places like the DR Congo without reliable internet. And this is where you begin with the straw man arguments. Well, there's people that are in the Congo, man, that don't have good internet, don't have access to reliable internet. I'm sure those people are not going to be fired. And I'm sure Elon Musk's tweet and request is not specifically targeting people in the Congo without reliable internet. This is how the Democrats straw man their way through what's going on. And that's exactly what I said about in response. It's a straw man argument. This is targeting the millions of federal workers who have not been in the office for 4+ years now, which I've got a clip coming up on, 4+ years now, that aren't doing anything for the government. They are sitting at home all day, moving their mouse on their computer every 25 minutes so their Microsoft Teams doesn't go to sleep, and collecting a paycheck. That's who this is targeting, the individuals that are truly not working for the American people. Folks, we are $36 and almost $37 trillion in debt. We have got to make dramatic and drastic changes to the way in which we spend money at the federal level. One of the ways that we spend a lot of money is with personnel and benefits. There is a lot of money in personnel and benefits. There are millions of federal employees across the country. This is not a complicated task. This is not an overburdensome task. In private business, most places request something from you every week indicating what you accomplished. I spent some time before doing the radio show in Wilmington doing IT work through what is known as an MSP, a managed service provider. We provided IT to small and medium-sized businesses. We tracked every second of work that we did in regards to a customer. When a customer submitted an issue, whether it was via the phone or sending in an email, it opened up a ticket in our system and a clock immediately started ticking. We were required to keep track of every second that we spent working with a customer or a customer issue the entire week. That data was tracked. That data was used to see how efficient and how effective we were in completing issues and tasks every single day, 40 plus hours a week. Whether you were on the phone or responding with somebody via an email, you were tracking your time in a ticket. It's just, I don't know why this is so burdensome, why this is such a ridiculous request. I said, get in line or get out and find other employment. It's very simple. And I truly believe that. If you don't want to deal with these demands, if you can't operate in this kind of environment that is going to be looking at accountability, then you shouldn't be there. You need to go find something else to do. And then I'll end on this post from Anthony Lamessa, who is not a fan of Elon Musk's plan here, not a fan of what I was saying. He said, Nick, there are already robust accountability tools in place to track federal workers and measure their accomplishments. The problem here is that Elon's threat that people will be treated as resigned if they don't respond to a single BS email. Now, of course, a couple of people jumped in the comments on this and said, what are you talking about with robust accountability? There's no robust accountability within the federal government. And I said the following. Robust accountability in the federal government can't even exist in the same sentence. And I have an example. Go ask the people of Western North Carolina about accomplishments from the federal government. It went back and forth and on and on and on. And it's as simple as this. We won. We set the agenda. You are going to hear that a lot from me over the next couple of years because this is where we're at in politics right now. This is where we're at in our society. Regardless of what you think should happen, regardless of what you want to happen, Donald Trump is in charge. The American people selected him to be the president of the United States. He was already talking about partnering with somebody like Elon Musk and at the time Vivek Ramaswamy to lead the Department of Government Efficiency. They talked about sweeping radical change to the federal government. And what's happening? We're seeing sweeping radical change. Anybody that is acting like they're blindsided by what's going on is just a fool. They're just a complete and total fool. Trump ran on this. And I don't remember where it was within this thread, this back and forth. But interfacing with the federal government, which is something that people don't have to do very often. You may only do it once a year filing your taxes. Is an incredibly unproductive and frustrating experience for the most part. Not every person, not every time. But I think I can paint with a pretty broad brush to say interfacing with the federal government is not a simple or easy task. And it's not because the workers suck. It's not because the workers don't want to do anything. In a lot of cases, it's because of the federal bureaucracy and the red tape that has been created throughout every single agency in our government. That's one of the big issues. These workers are not empowered to do anything. They've got to check 600 boxes on a sheet before they can accomplish your relatively simple task or goal. Go talk to anybody that has had issues with the IRS and ask them how their experience was interfacing with the federal government. It's a freaking nightmare. You are on a back and forth revolving loop forever trying to get your issue dealt with. It never ends. Hours on the phone, multiple emails, constantly transferred between this person and that person to never actually get the issue solved. Months, if not years, to get some of this stuff dealt with. Why do you think every time I talk to an elected official, whether it's at the federal level, whether it's somebody like Senator Ted Budd, who hopefully will be joining us coming up here in the next couple weeks, or members of Congress, I always ask them about their constituent services, and they always say a similar thing. If you're having issues with a passport, a VA benefits, Social Security, reach out to our office. Senator Ted Budd's office is not responsible for doling out passports or dealing with VA benefits or dealing with Social Security. His office is not responsible for that. That doesn't fall immediately under his purview of providing those benefits. So why is a constituent services such a big issue for elected officials? It's because the federal government doesn't do a good job at dealing with those things. So in the intermediary, you have to reach out to your congressman or your senator to get help. Why? Because the government is incapable of dealing with your issue with you. They're incapable of dealing with it, so you've got to get a third party involved, which, again, very grateful for our representatives, our senators, that are able to provide this conduit. But that's an issue. You should not have to reach out to your freaking U.S. senator to get something dealt with the federal government. You should be able to contact the agency that's in charge and get the issue solved. But that's not how it works. You go in this constant circle. You deal with being transferred here, transferred there, moved over here. Sit on the phone for 3 hours waiting to talk to somebody. It's a ridiculously awful, painful experience. The federal government needs to work for the American people. That is not something that is too much to request. It's not only a want, it's a necessity. We fund our federal government, not of choice, but with threat of going to jail with taxes. And in response to that, we deserve and demand that the federal government works for us. Simple as that. I don't know why this has become so controversial. I don't know how this became such a line in the sand that is being drawn by individuals that predominantly fall on the left. Why don't you want your government to be accountable? Why don't you want the people's interfaces with the federal government to be fast, efficient, and useful? Why are you for keeping the bureaucracy alive? I struggle to wrap my head around why that's a good thing. How that makes our nation more prosperous when you have to get the runaround from a federal bureaucrat for hours on end on something that is a relatively mundane and simple task. And why you have to get other people involved to accomplish that. I don't know why you would support that. I don't know why you would be in favor of that. Unless for the federal bureaucracy has been padding and lining your pockets for decades. Unless you have some vested interest in all of these employees not actually accomplishing anything. Part of the bureaucracy and part of the red tape is to get nothing done. It's very intentional. If government acts quickly and efficiently and fast with things, people stop relying on it. And what happens when there's no reliance on government? Well, then people start to question, what is this thing doing? What is this behemoth doing? What is it operating as? Because my issues are dealt with. My issues are solved. I don't have these problems anymore. Maybe that's part of it. So I thought, I'm going to be an equal opportunity offender here. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. So I thought, well, let's do a little exercise together, shall we? I'm going to open up a brand new Word document, and I'm going to go through just 5 things that I accomplished last week. Things that I did last week. Okay. We'll put a nice little heading on this. And we're just going to, off the top of my head, we're just going to come up with 5 things that I did last week. On Tuesday, I went to Raleigh and took part in a team building activity, a yearly team building activity for the Carolina Journal. I did that on Tuesday. Okay, so we got that in our list. So went to Raleigh, team building event Tuesday. Okay, great. That's a pretty good accomplishment. I published an article on North Carolina social districts. Published a story on NC social districts. And now I'm not gonna double dip in this, but I interviewed 3 individuals to publish that story. Wilmington City Councilman Luke Waddell, 2 individuals with the town of Wendell, which is in northern Wake County, and an individual from the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association. But I'm not, I could write all that down. You see how easy it would be to pad this report? I could say, interview this person, interview that person. That would fill up my report. But I'm not. So I published a story on North Carolina social districts. That happened, that came out, I don't know, Thursday or something like that, Wednesday or Thursday. What else did I do last week? I rewired part of my studio here to deal with an audio issue I was having. I would consider that an accomplishment. I was having an intermittent issue with some audio, and I rewired part of my studio. I'd say that was an accomplishment. It was something that was kind of a nagging problem that I was letting fester for a little while. So I did that. Okay. Again, so I would consider that something that I accomplished last week. Now, if we really want to dig into it, I hosted 10 plus hours of live content. I did that, an hour for Carolina Journal in Charlotte at 5 a.m. and then a little over an hour here Monday through Friday. I would consider that an accomplishment. I'd consider that something that I did last week. It's a tangible object and tangible thing that I produced. And then what else? What was what did I spend some time? Late last week, I spent some time with a new system to pull audio and video clips for the podcast. Found a service to help me produce some clips to put out on social media. That's 5 things. 5 things that I accomplished last week. And again, if I really wanted to exacerbate this, I could take one of the things that I did, either went to Raleigh for a team building event or published a story, and pull 2 or 3 bullet points out of each of those things that I did. That's how easy this would be to do. So why is this such a complicated task? Why is this such a hardball issue to ask federal employees? These are the things that I did last week. This is just off the top of my head. If I actually sat down and went through what I did, I could come up with 20 plus things that I accomplished or did last week. Every interview that I did for the radio show, every news clip that I watched and cut down, every article. I mean, you could, it's so easy to deal with and do. But if you're a member of the federal bureaucracy, we don't like that. That's not something that we support. That's not something that we want to see. Now, Elon Musk did follow up on this. He put out a post Sunday morning and said, quote, "A large number of good responses have already been received. These are the people who should be considered for promotion." So it looks like some individuals within the federal government were able to respond to this. Sounds like some individuals actually believe that they're accomplishing good work for the American people, and they're going to respond. Members of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, and the National Treasury Employees Union, NTEU, which are two of the largest unions representing federal workers, told their members not to answer. The union president of AFGE said that they will challenge any unlawful terminations of our members and federal employees across the country. Hopefully those employees did it anyway. Responded to the simple request from the Office of Personnel Management. Again, what did you do last week? I caught an interesting clip this morning. Ralph Norman, who is a Republican from South Carolina, he serves on the House Financial Services Committee, was on Fox and Friends earlier this morning because there's also this big push to move federal employees back into the office. See, this is part of the lack of accountability that exists. These individuals have not been in office in 4+ years. And now let me be clear, I'm very fortunate and lucky to work from home. I enjoy it. I have spent time working in offices and spent time hybrid. I'm fortunate to be able to work from home. I believe I can accomplish that pretty well. I'm able to do everything that I need to do, get my shows done, get everything accomplished here from home. But I work for the private sector where I have that flexibility and I have that leverage to be able to do that. At the federal level, that leverage doesn't exist. There are plenty of pros in working for the federal government or a state government, including benefits packages, PTO, retirement, all of those things that I don't have in the private sector. One of the trade-offs is I get to work from home. But that doesn't exist for every facet of every job that has ever existed. So I've got this very interesting clip from Ralph Norman that I'll have coming up. Plus, North Carolina lawmakers are moving to ban DEI statewide. Very interesting details on that coming up as well. Plus, some news on Dan Bongino. All of that coming up as the Nick Craig Show rolls on this Monday morning, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, and X, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And welcome back to the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this Monday morning on YouTube, Rumble, and X. We're talking a lot about, doing your job, a very complicated task seemingly for federal employees that don't want to prove what they do. I do my job, and I do it in part every day by using Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that combines news from around the world in one place so that you can compare news coverage. For every news source, you can see if they have a political bias, how reliable their reporting is, and who owns them. One of the great features of Ground News is their blind spot feed that highlights news disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. Get your news from thousands of sources worldwide in one place and verify your information to know where your news is coming from. To accomplish my job, I use Ground News every day to prep for the show. Subscribe through my link to get 40% off your Vantage subscription. That's the one I use to get unlimited access to every feature. Visit nickcraig.com/ground, GROUND, to learn more and save 40%. Your subscription not only helps the show, but it supports Ground News as they make the media landscape more transparent. nickcraig.com/ground. All right, keeping our thread on these federal employees this morning, caught a very interesting clip from Fox and Friends just after the 6 o'clock hour. Ralph Norman was on, who is the senator or a representative from South Carolina. He's the House Financial Services Committee chairman. And he had this to say in response to these federal workers. I found this to be highly fascinating. Take a listen.
Price tag that the taxpayers pay is right at $271 billion a year. Is it too much to ask for them to verify why they're making an average salary of $106,000 a year? Do you think in the private sector that single mom who is working 2 jobs at a restaurant can't justify where she was, or the hygienist at the dentist's office can't verify how many patients they saw? The absurdity and I guess the arrogance of the workers who says that's a heavy lift is what's wrong with that's what the Americans are sick and tired of. It's not their money. We're the ones who are paying the bills. We have a right to know.
I thought that was a phenomenal clip from Ralph Norman. The arrogance, that's a great way to describe it. The arrogance of these individuals to claim that they're too good to provide to the people that pay their paycheck as to what they do day in and day out. And this is, of course, all on the idea that there's not a single government agency that is occupying even half of their office space. So not only are there likely individuals not accomplishing anything in a 40-hour work week, literally nothing, but you've got the federal government who is leasing, renting, or owning space that is half full. So you're just sitting with more than half of an office empty. Again, from Ralph Norman, quote, not a single government agency is occupying even half of their office space. Elon Musk followed this up with a post early this morning and said, those who ignored President Donald Trump's executive order to return to work have now received over a month's warning. Starting this week, those who still fail to return to the office will be placed on administrative leave. Again, if you are in the private sector and you are told, hey, you are working from home, it's time to come back to the office. And for a month, you tell your boss, sure, I'm going to come back to the office. And you don't do so. You are likely going to lose your job. You were asked to do something by the individual who pays your paycheck, the individual who sets the standard for your company, your supervisor, your employer, and you have decided to give them the middle finger and not respond or not do what they asked you to do. I can promise you from firsthand experience, when somebody tells you to do something and you say that you're not going to do it or you're going to do it anyway, you are likely to be terminated. You are likely to be put on probation, suspended, whatever it might be, paid administrative leave, whatever. I can't wrap my head around how every business in America operates with some level of accountability, from your local McDonald's to a Fortune 500 company. All of them have some level of accountability. And you ask for the simplest task of our federal employees. Tell me what you did last week, and oh, hey, you got to come back to the office. You weren't hired to be a hybrid or remote worker. You were hired to be in person, in office 40 hours a week. And those two things are a bridge too far for these individuals. I just can't wrap my head around it. I will never be able to understand why that is a bridge too far. And again, for the individuals that don't agree with this, don't like this, don't want to go back into the office, submit your resignation. There are plenty of companies in the private sector that are employing hybrid or 100% remote workers. If that's an issue for you, which it is for a lot of people, there's plenty of options, plenty of opportunities. Get a remote job. Go on LinkedIn or Indeed right now and start looking for them. There's thousands of them. If you don't like what's going on, then you have to make a change. But we're not just going to bow down and pander to, well, this is the way that we've done things. Oh, yeah, we've never had to actually be accountable for anything that we've done before, so we're just not going to do it. No, again, that game is over. We're in charge. We set the agenda now, not you. We do. And this is the agenda that we voted for. This is the agenda that we set as the American people. Electing President Donald Trump to go into the federal government and essentially dismantle it. Find the waste, find the inefficiencies, and get our government back on track. Not only working for the American people, but also doing so in an efficient manner so that our hard-earned taxpayer dollars, what you and I bust our ass 40 hours a week doing, where we have accountability, we send that to the federal government so a bunch of unelected bureaucrats can move their mouse every 25 minutes so their computer doesn't go to sleep. That's the system. That's the pipeline of the federal government. I don't think that's fair. As somebody that has accountability at my job, like all of you do, I don't find it fair that part of my paycheck goes directly to the federal government, but they can't be held to even anywhere close to a standard that I am or that you are, where you have to track everything that you're accomplishing within a day. I don't think that that's a fair system. The president wants to see a change, and he is directing individuals within his purview, including Elon Musk, to roll out that change. I can't wait, and I really do hope that some sort of collaboration report is combining all of these responses is put together by Musk and the Doge team so we can actually see what are some of these things that are being accomplished in a 40-hour work week. With, by the way, Ralph Norman saying that what the average federal employee salary is over $100,000 a year. Must be nice. Must be real nice. So this idea that you're going to stonewall this, you're not going to partake, you're not going to play part in this. Yeah, well, again, the gig is up. We set the agenda, we set the standard. Now get in line or get the hell out. It's not that complicated. I'm sure we will have more about this throughout the week. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Nick Craig Show. Coming up on Thursday evening, we are going to be hosting our second what I call a hangout chat that takes place for individuals that subscribe over on Patreon, where you can chip into the show $5, $10 a month. You can set a custom amount as well if you're so inclined to do so. You get access to daily show notes as well as bonus content, including this monthly Zoom call where we jump on, chat about politics for a couple of hours, kind of go around the table, talk about what's going on, what's on everybody's mind. That'll be taking place this Thursday evening. So if you are not already subscribed and want to get in on that, patreon.com/Nick Craig. That's patreon.com/Nick Craig. You can also find the link over at the website, nickcraig.com. We've got some major news out of North Carolina this morning. This happened just after we got off the air on Friday, as North Carolina lawmakers moved to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the state. The bill, House Bill 171, was filed Friday morning in the North Carolina General Assembly, and it proposes a ban on the promotion, funding, and implementation of DEI programs within state agencies. That includes things like hiring practices, training programs, as well as the establishment of diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. The legislation was sponsored by Representative Brandon Jones out of Columbus County, Neil Jackson out of Moore County, Jared Lowry out of Robeson County, and Blair Edens out of Wilkes County. The leaders of this effort argue that the taxpayers deserve to know their dollars are funding a government that operates on fairness and equal opportunity rather than an ideological mandate at the expense of efficiency and public trust. Brendan Jones spoke to the Carolina Journal on Friday and said, quote, House Bill 171 is about eliminating the divisive and ineffective DEI bureaucracy in state and local government. These programs have injected politics into hiring, promotions, and contracting, prioritizing ideology over qualifications and competence. Government jobs and opportunities should be awarded based on merit, not forced quotas or political mandates. And reading directly from the legislation, the bill on the General Assembly website, no state agency shall promote, support, fund, implement, or maintain workplace DEI programs, policies, or initiatives. Now, we talked to New Hanover County Commissioner Dane Scalise back a couple of weeks ago about his comments about dismantling DEI here in New Hanover County. And he brought up that this is an opportunity, that the times that we're living right now with this agenda being set at the federal level, that this is a pristine opportunity for individuals in Raleigh, our General Assembly, to get rid of DEI at a statewide level. And this is exactly what House Bill 171 looks to do. Any group that's receiving any state or taxpayer dollars cannot partake in these programs. Because we know that plenty of areas will get rid of their DEI initiatives. But we played some comments last week from a Wake County School Board meeting with 7 Democrats on a 9-member board. They're never going to get rid of their DEI group. They're never going to dismantle their diversity, equity, and inclusion departments. And so the only way to do this is by rooting it out at the statewide level. Bar this kind of discriminatory practices from happening. And that's exactly what it is. It's discriminatory practices. Jones said this, quote, "For far too long, DEI policies have undermined fairness and efficiency in North Carolina's state and local governments, prioritizing political agendas over merit and qualifications. House Bill 171 puts an end to these divisive programs and ensures that hiring, promotions, and contracts are based on individual achievement, not identity-based quotas." End quote there from Representative Jones. Bravo. This is a phenomenal piece of legislation. Again, who is setting the agenda right now? We are. Republicans have control of the General Assembly, and we are setting this agenda. This is being brought forth by the national discussion at the national stage with President Donald Trump. Now, some of the co-sponsors of this bill include Representative Ted Davis, who, of course, represents a lot of us here in New Hanover County, as well as Representative Charlie Miller, who represents the southern half of New Hanover, as well as portions of Brunswick County as well. Both of those individuals co-sponsors on this legislation to get the state back in line and follow the trend that we're seeing at the federal level. The bill was introduced. It was filed on Friday. The General Assembly has an incredibly busy calendar coming up this week, and we'll wait and see what happens with this legislation. Obviously, it will be able to pass. Presumably, it will be able to pass the House, pass the Senate. Presumably, Democrat Governor Josh Stein would veto that legislation because he's not in favor of dismantling DEI. It's a prized tool for the left to use in their discriminatory hiring practices. And so that's going to have to come back to it's going to come back likely to a veto override. And so the question is, can Republicans in the House, can they get one Democrat to come across the aisle and support this legislation? Can they do that? The verdict on that is not out yet. We're just going to have to wait and see. But this is how states need to operate. Do not put it up to the local governments, because we know that these very left-leaning local governments will continue with these ridiculous discriminatory DEI practices that we've seen, unfortunately, unfold over the last couple of years. And I'll say this. For a private business, I don't think DEI should be outlawed. I don't think the federal government should ban DEI within private business. If you own a company, if you operate a company and want these kind of practices, as long as they are not going to the level of discriminating against individuals that are protected under federal law, you should be allowed to do whatever you want. You want to have these ridiculously stupid trainings that people have to take every 6 months or every year for DEI? If you want to piss away your money on that and waste your workers' productivity sitting through stupid trainings, that's your prerogative. I don't care. But as a taxpayer at both the local, state, and federal level, I don't believe that my government should be partaking in these kind of practices at all. And I love what's in House Bill 171, and I look forward to tracking it as it makes its way through the General Assembly. So I'll have a link to the full details, including that full bill, in our show notes this morning over at patreon.com/Nick Craig, where you can check that out. A couple of final things here this morning. Some interesting news over at MSNBC, the progressive news outlet, which, there's a lot of hate for MSNBC, which I don't have. And let me explain quickly. MSNBC very clearly draws the line in the sand as to who they are and what they are. They are a left-wing cable news network. They hire left-wing individuals like Jen Psaki, the Biden press secretary. I have no issue with MSNBC. It's clear what they are. It's clear what their agenda is. And I am all for, contrary to the left, all for freedom of speech. If MSNBC wants to program their 24-hour news block with a bunch of far-left progressive nonsense, that's their prerogative to do so, and I'm glad it exists. But they're making some big-time shakeups. Joy Reid, who has been anchoring a 7 p.m. show called The Readout, R-E-I-D, that's her last name, The Readout since 2020, is out at the network. After that, the 7 p.m. hour, the 7 p.m. hour will feature a panel helmed by former Democrat strategist Simone Townsend, Elise Menendez, and former RNC chair Michael Steele, who, of course, is a very anti-Trump, anti-Elon Musk individual. But, of course, they'll say, oh, we got a Republican here, so it's a balanced show now. Joy Reid being moved out of her position, essentially being fired from the network. And that's not the only change. Rachel Maddow, who is scheduled to host her show 5 nights a week until the end of Trump's 100 days in office, is also set to be filled by somebody else. So I guess that show is also going to be leaving as well. All of this as MSNBC continues to struggle with viewership, as MSNBC continues to struggle to gain an audience, because their message is not working and resonating with the American people, and individuals don't want to listen to that. They don't want to partake in that kind of news. They don't find it interesting or engaging or anything of the sort. So they're shutting it off. They're not watching it. They're not supporting it. And MSNBC, like almost all other media, is an advertiser-supported business. Meaning that if you don't have individuals, companies, that are willing to support your product with advertising, you can't pay your employees and you can't continue to operate. We're seeing the similar thing taking place over at CNN. And so with Joy Reid being out, I thought we would just kind of play through a couple of her comments and things that, really were the highlights of her time, her tenure over at MSNBC. This is the kind of content, and for many of you, you've probably never watched Joy Reid before, but this is the kind of hardcore commentary, the real insightful commentary that we were getting from a Joy Reid and MSNBC. And after listening to this, it's pretty hard to imagine why she would be departing the network. Take a listen.
We begin our final sprint, having arrived at that point in the election season where basically we on this side of the TV screen have said all we can. We've laid out the stakes in this crucial election, where one side stands for freedom while the other meets the textbook definition of fascism, namely a far-right dictatorial regime like Hitler's Germany or Franco's Spain or Mussolini's Italy, but also white-ruled South Africa before Mandela and the black majority took control, or Vladimir Putin's Russia, Viktor Orban's Hungary, or Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela today, that suppresses the rights of women and minorities, uses the military to execute the whims of a strongman dictator, and controls and suppresses the press, education, the arts, rewrites history to suit a favored and dominant racial class, and foments extravagant corruption in order to enrich the dictator and his friends.
Wow. I can't imagine why Joy Reid would be leaving MSNBC with that kind of insightful analysis. Turns out people don't actually like watching that. Turns out there's a very limited audience that wants to listen to that same garbage repeated night after night, hour after hour over at MSNBC. What a ridiculous opening statement. That was 24 hours before election night, so just a couple of months ago. I'll have a full link over at the Patreon for the Patreon members. Outkick did a great job combining a whole bunch of her recent clips just to go and show you how deranged this host was over at MSNBC. These networks have no choice but to shift. They have no choice but to change the way in which they operate because there's just no audience. Nobody wants to hear this. Even the most far left progressives who think this is the case, they don't want to hear this every night. And it's obvious. Just look at the ratings. They're abysmal. So farewell to Joy Reid over at MSNBC. I guess we won't have any more ridiculous clips coming up from her anytime soon. Maybe she'll start a podcast. That seems to be pretty prominent. Some major media news coming in late last night. A post on Truth Social from Donald Trump. Great news for law enforcement and the American justice. Dan Bongino, a man of incredible love and passion for our country, has just been named the next deputy director of the FBI by the man who will be the best director ever, Kash Patel. Dan has a master's degree in psychology from CUNY, that's the community college system in New York, and an MBA from Penn State. He was a member of the New York Police Department, a highly respected special agent with the United States Secret Service, and is now one of the most successful podcasters in the country, something that he is willing and prepared to give up in order to serve. Working with our great new United States Attorney General Pam Bondi and Director Patel, fairness, justice, law, and order will be brought back to America, and quickly. Congratulations, Dan. And boy, oh boy, you thought Kash Patel was going to be a problem within the FBI? Dan Bongino is going to come in there like a wrecking ball. The deputy director of the FBI? I don't think the left has truly wrapped their head around how badly they screwed up in November. Putting forward the most unlikable candidate possible in Kamala Harris to save America from what you just heard from Joy Reid, the fascist dictator that was Donald Trump. They screwed the pooch royally. And boy, I'll tell you what, is it going to be a fun couple of years in America. Democrats thought Kash Patel was bad getting confirmed. Just wait. Have you ever listened to Dan Bongino? I love listening to Dan. He is a phenomenal media personality. He has so much insight as to what goes on day in and day out. Boy, is it going to be fun to see him as the deputy director of the FBI. Now, with that, we're losing a major voice in the conservative landscape. And it's unfortunate, but it was obviously the right move for Dan. This coming in from Barrett Media. Dan Bongino is set to depart Westwood One to join the Trump administration. His syndicated radio show, according to Cumulus Media, says, quote, "We extend our heartfelt congratulations to Dan Bongino on his decision to take on the role of deputy director of the FBI. Dan has entertained and informed tens of millions of listeners every day, and we are grateful for our successful partnership. We look forward to welcoming Dan back in the future, and we truly value our audience, advertisers, and affiliates, and remain dedicated to bringing them the next exciting chapter for this programming soon." He fills the 12 to 3, the very pivotal, what was the Rush Limbaugh slot for Westwood One. His show is ending March 14th, so a couple of weeks from now. And this leaves Westwood One and Cumulus Media in a tough spot to try and fill Dan Bongino's shoes in that, again, very influential time slot. So he is going to be leaving his radio show. He'll be leaving his podcast as well, and is going to be taking a much higher calling position over as the deputy director of the FBI. I cannot wait to see Bongino in this position. And like many of you will be listening today at noon to hear what his opening comments are. Sucks to be losing Dan in this media landscape. Again, very influential, very important figure, has done a lot for the conservative movement in the last couple of years that he's been on the radio, has been podcasting. He's got like the top 5. He's got one of the top 5 podcasts in the entire country. I mean, you've got yes, Joe Rogan, obviously very popular. Dan Bongino is constantly hovering in second, third, fourth place. He is an incredibly influential media figure. It's going to be a big void, but higher calling here. Huge position over at the FBI. Wishing Dan Bongino, well, had the opportunity to meet him a couple of years ago. Great guy. And boy, do I look forward to seeing what he does up there at the FBI. Very much looking forward to that. Well, a lot that we got into this morning. Don't forget that if you would like to get our daily show notes and access to our exclusive monthly hangout, which will be taking place this Thursday night, head on over to patreon.com/Nick Craig and subscribe over there. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. We are back live tomorrow morning at 7 on YouTube, Rumble, and X, and available 24/7 via podcast. Have a great day.